Rabbi Hammer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yigal. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Now, obviously, you're a rabbi, and a lot of the listeners know that this podcast is about men's issues and more family in-depth conversations. And I had the pleasure and the honor of listening to you speak at the Hebrew Day School. Rabbi Weiser and the crew over there brought you in to talk about a topic that isn't spoken about a lot, especially from your perspective. And so I brought you on because I think it's very, very important. I have a 7-year-old daughter, a 4 and a 2. I know a lot of my listeners have young kids and teenagers as well. And I think it's extremely important to spread the message that you spread that day and that you're in New Jersey at the moment spreading as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Once again, thank you for having me. And I couldn't agree with you more. This is, as we'll get into it, this is a subject that is absolute taboo and still swept under the carpet by many, many communities, not only in the Jewish world, but in many parts of the world. And it certainly warrants review, understanding, and to become more informed.
Yeah. And what we're talking about is mental health issues, essentially, right? It's mental health issues, especially in our youth, in our teenagers, in the next generation. So if you can tell us the story of how you came to lecture for the IDF, you go around the world lecturing for communities. Tell us how it started and how you came to this point.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, just to make, for clarity's sake, yeah, it's true. Definitely an issue of mental health issues, so to speak, as you put it, mental health awareness, but perhaps even more pertinent and even more potent is suicide prevention. And the reason why I say that, Yigal, is because people are afraid to say the word suicide. It's something that still, as I said before, remains a taboo. People are afraid if they mention the word that it will promote and that it will certainly encourage others and so on and so forth. And that's a mistake. So we do need to speak about that word.
Yeah.
What brought me and my organization to this very, very rude awakening was catastrophe. Almost 3 years ago, in 2 weeks, we'll have the Azkara, we'll have the memorial of the Yortzeit, the day in which our dear daughter Gila, at the young, ripe age of 18, died from suicide 3 years ago. And the only way that I, if you may, could muster some kind of response was by indeed broadcasting, speaking, and bringing that awareness to communities, not only exclusively Jewish, but predominantly educational, academic, schools, faculties, communities, to be able to understand that, particularly when it comes to adolescents, there are many out there who are suffering, who are in pain, who don't know what and how to do with themselves or to deal with their mental health issue. They might have gone through a serious trauma and they don't know how to release or to express that pain. And so it festers inside of them. And as a result of that, and obviously I'm giving you, the short end of the stick here, but as a result of that, it leads to various illnesses, various signs, and unfortunately, tragically, in Gila's case and in many other young people, it can lead to suicide. That's what brought me to this agenda.
Now, I'd love to get into Gila's story and life, because you said it so clearly that time I heard you speak. But I also want to ask the question I think a lot of people are thinking at this moment is, how you brought yourself to be able to keep speaking about this, apart from the awareness, the sadness, the catastrophe that you spoke about, going around from community to community and speaking about it time and time again. How we asked you the question that day at the Hebrew Day School, and we said, how do you do this? And you said, this is, I do this because I want to spread the message. I want people to know. So the first question I have is, why do you think, especially in the Jewish community, that suicide is brushed under the rug? Let's talk about that first.
Well, first of all, to address what you were saying at first, I always say that the only way that I know, unfortunately, to confront death is by assisting others to preserve life. And as far as the Jewish community goes, it's certainly embedded in tradition, and tradition or traditional thinking is not always progressive, and it's not always innovative. And when you're dealing with the times around us, and the amount of people who are dealing with mental health issues. By the way, when I grew up, I don't recall anyone really having mental issues. Of course, there were, but we didn't really know about them. It wasn't as blatant. Perhaps the world wasn't as fast paced. It wasn't as open. It wasn't as public as it is today. And today, within a world that is lacking communication, lacking dialogue because of technology, I'm talking about one-to-one, person-to-person, persona to persona. You're really, there's a lot of people who are lacking that personal touch, that human understanding, that compassion, that empathy. And as a result of that, the mental health issues are becoming more flagrant, if you may. The Jewish community is largely embedded in tradition. Even the ones that are not observant, they always, to call yourself Jewish, it means that you have a 3,000-year history. It means that you have a legacy. It means patriarchs, matriarchs, and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, sometimes it is impeded by or the lack of thinking progressively. And so because of that, there's a lot of stigma that really revolves around mental health, certainly around suicide. And that's in many parts of the world. But you asking about the Jewish community, I think that that's the reason why. People are just, afraid. In addition, when you talk about the Orthodox community, okay, and you're talking about a certain amount of pressure towards marriage, many communities don't want to speak about the problems, or families don't want to speak about the problems that their children have per se, because they're afraid that it might affect their ability to get married, their ability to build their own families. And that also remains a taboo, and it's not justified. It's improper, actually, because I don't believe that any family would ever say, we don't want to tell anyone that someone has, God forbid, cancer. There was a time 40 years ago, your parents, my parents, grandparents, they didn't say the word cancer. That too was a taboo. But with time, we speak about it. It's an illness. Unfortunately, it's rampant in the world. And the more we speak and engage about it, the more treatments we can find, the more we're able to solve some of those illnesses. Well, the same thing is with regards to mental health. Mental health, I always call the cancer of the brain. We as a people, and this is not just Jewish, but as a society, we say in America consistently, seeing is believing. Well, if that's the case, you look at someone who might have a mental illness or a mental challenge, and there might be lively, social, friendly, they might be a leader of the pack, and yet internally they are suffering. We don't see it, so we can't relate to it. And it's a mistake, because it is cancer of the brain, and it needs to be addressed just like any other illness that exists in the world.
I want to bring something up real quick. We had an episode about infertility, and you talk about how we don't share a lot of what's going on in our lives because of the stigma of judgment. And some people don't want to mess up the shidduchim and being able to get married. But you're right. If we don't speak about it, we can't be transparent. We can't help other people. We can't help our community about it. So I'd love for you to tell us the story of Gila. And once again, this is very hard for me. I'm going to be very transparent. I've heard you speak. I have 3 daughters. And, when I was listening to your story, I was tearing up and I was bawling. But please share your story about Gila and the incredible work that you're doing today.
Okay. So, Yigal, first of all, I don't like to hear about anyone who's in pain. It hurts me. And I mean that sincerely, because unfortunately, I've always been a sincere person, and now I really do understand what pain means. And I understand when someone is in pain. But if you're bawling and you're tearing, I'm not belittling that, but you can no one can imagine the pain that we go through with a child loss and a young girl who is so rambunctious, vivacious, lively. And by the way, she really was a social butterfly and almost a social leader, essentially. And yet at 18, she took her life. But Gila's story really, I often call it textbook. And what I mean by that is she didn't have necessarily a complicated mental health problem. She had gone through a trauma. And had we been given the proper direction, and this is where we get back to the breaking stigmas, the discussion, the conversation, the dialogue, had we been given the proper direction, the proper guidance, had we been given someone who could speak to us and mention the word suicide, perhaps the script would have been different. I always tell people, if I knew then what I know now, I'm virtually convinced that the end of the story would have been different and that Gila would have overcome and would be alive today. But because no one spoke to us, or to her for that matter, about the word suicide and about the fact that if someone exhibits certain signs, that is or can be what could be suicidal ideation, because no one mentioned that to us, or to Gila for that matter, unfortunately, what happened. Gila had gone through a serious trauma, which led classically to depression, anxiety, frustration, lack of confidence, loss of social interaction. I mean, obviously, I'm telling you just the tidbits or the highlights, but ultimately, when someone is experiencing those things, it's a downward spiral, and they feel trapped, so trapped in a place of darkness and despair that they just don't know if there are any viable options out there. And the only viable, option that they see in front of them is taking their lives. Now, it's very, very important to understand that for what I'm about to tell you. And this is something I tell audiences all the time. If I had to focus, Yigal, on one focal central matter, one fundamental issue, it would be this: the vast majority, not all, the vast majority of people, particularly adolescents, who die from suicide do not want to die. They want to live. They just don't have direction, guidance, or they don't have the know-how of what they're supposed to do for themselves. And neither do many of the parents. We weren't negligent parents. We followed what the doctor said. We followed what the psychologist said, but no one spoke to us about the heart, the issue of the matter. And that is that our daughter, because of her depression, because of the trauma that she experienced, and because she wasn't hitting those chords in therapy enough, she was spiraling into darkness. And she would eventually entertain suicide because of the pain internal. So it's very, very important that parents understand this. And Yigal, I can't tell you how many calls I get. I just got off 2 calls this morning. Okay, I've been up since 4 a.m. 2 calls already from Israel, by the way. I'm in the States right now. Okay, so people call all the time. I can't tell you how many parents, I'm not blaming them, do not know, do not understand. I'm talking about responsible parents who want to and would, and certainly would be reactionary, but they just don't know. They don't have the guidance. They don't have the tools. They don't have the knowledge rather. So it's very important that we educate so that people do know, so that people aren't afraid, so that people do understand. Just so you know, I just got off a phone call 3 hours ago with a woman whose daughter is suffering, and she's heavily involved in the mental health world. But tragically, her daughter attempted suicide. Thank God she's okay. But she called me because she said, I've never dealt with suicide. Please share your knowledge, impart, and tell me what I'm supposed to do. And one of the things that she did not know, which actually shocked me, was that if someone is on psychiatric medications, they cannot take themselves off that medication. If they fail or do not take the medication consistently, it is extremely psychotically dangerous And so this is something I was actually surprised that she didn't know that, but she wanted to help her daughter, and her daughter didn't want to take the medication, side effects for a month. And I said to her that's a big, big, big no-no. It can cause a lot of problems that can happen. So these are just, and I'm not blaming the parents. I'm blaming the system. I'm blaming the lack of education. I'm blaming the institutions that are not discussing this. And it has to be discussed. The more knowledge we have, the more we break those stigmas, the more we discuss, converse, and solve those problems, at the very least, to be in the know.
I agree. I think that especially today, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think that a lot of people are saying that because of the pandemic, a lot of these mental health issues have been, multiplied in adolescence because they were stuck alone. They were Zooming all day. There was no interaction. There was no, they didn't grow up essentially the way that you and I grew up, in the world. And because of that, there's a lot of mental health issues, depression. What are some of the signs, I guess, that parents can start looking at for those who are listening? And because just really quickly, we're not taught this. Like if I didn't go to that night at the Hebrew Day School, I would have no idea about the information that you're talking about, because nobody says, oh, and by the way, from this age to this age, be careful of depression, anxiety, suicide, these types of things. Here's the handbook, or here's a conversation about that. So what are some of the signs that parents can look for today, or things that they need to know off the bat to be able to prevent something like this, or start down the road of helping their teenager or child?
Okay, so first of all, you're 100% correct in what you said at the beginning about Corona. There's no question. First of all, I've heard from schools, interestingly enough, that because kids didn't have or didn't engage in social interaction for about 1.5 to 2 years, their maturity level has digressed.
Yeah.
So actually schools have told me that kids who are, let's say, in 7th grade today have a maturity level of 6th or 5th graders, which is quite concerning. Okay. So, and that's something that's going to, hopefully have to be rectified. That's number one. Number two, kudos to your school. Okay. Your Hebrew Day School, Swall, San Diego Jewish Day School, which, by the way, I don't know if you know, my parents started the school.
Yeah, I know.
Years ago. Like my dad was stationed there for a year, and he felt that there needed to be a Hebrew Day School, whatever it is. I have to give credit to them where credit is due, but kudos to the school that they brought me in and allowed me to converse. But Yigal, let me ask you a question. How many parents are there in that school? What's the parent body count? Approximately.
I mean, if you're about to ask how many parents are there compared to how many went to the speech, I just in my daughter's classes, there's got to be 30. There's got to be 120 parents just in their 2 classes. That's it.
Okay. We had 15 people.
Yeah.
At my lecture. 15. All right. So you're talking about, there's got to be at least 250, 300
More.
parents in the school.
Yeah.
I mean, that's excuse me for saying this, that's inexcusable. That's 100%. Insane.
That's a bunch of BS. I agree.
And there's no question, Yigal, that there are parents who are either dealing with the issues or don't know what to do, but they know that there is some kind of issue, and this gets to the signs.
And no doubt that there are students who are dealing with the issue that the parents don't know about.
Absolutely. I mean, the statistics today is that 1 in every 4 people are suffering from a mental challenge, or at some point in their life will. There's no question about it. Let's put it this way. It ain't 15 people who came to the lecture who are the only ones, 300 parents or 400 parent body who are dealing with mental health issues. There's no way.
Yeah.
So you see the problem that we're dealing with. And this is a modern Orthodox day school. It's not, some hole in the wall. It's a sophisticated, and there were kudos to them for doing it, but unfortunately there weren't enough people there. And I find many times, it could be my speaking, that's possible.
No, you're a great speaker. I will say you're a great speaker. I think about, sorry, not to interrupt you, but above and beyond, I think that like mental health issues aren't spoken about A lot. Going through the infertility process with my wife, I was depressed. I was down. I was going to therapy, and some people just didn't know what to say. I would speak, and there was no conversation. I felt alone. My wife was alone, and so I'm not comparing this to what we went through, but there's a lot of times that even in your best friends of 30 years, in your community members that you've known for 20 years, you're going to shul together with, we don't speak to each other about the truth. We're not transparent. We're just not.
And that goes back to the taboos, the stigmas. People are afraid. What do I say if I say, God forbid, something? No. And by the way, there's something that we have to remember, and that is our kids today, they know everything.
Yeah.
They're out there. They see everything. They're exposed to everything. So we're not fooling them. We'd be better served discussing things in a healthy educational forum rather than try and avoid them, because they're finding out about them anyway. And they're probably are finding out about them in a lot worse way than they would if they were engaged with their responsible adults, with their educational faculty, with their parents.
Yeah.
As far as signs go, getting back to that, okay. Look, if I tell teenage parents, well, if your kid is sleeping till 1 PM, it's problematic. They'll say, well, every kid does that today. I mean, it's like, so that's not a sign. But if there is consistent behavior, i.e., 2 to 3 weeks, where a child will all of a sudden no longer socialize, no longer leave their room, come straight home from school into their room, put their bag down, and not really emerge from that room, even when a family's eating dinner. They are not sleeping well or sleeping too much. They are no longer interested in things that used to interest them. They're no longer interacting socially. These are red signs, red flags that one has to be aware of, and one has to wonder, why is this happening? Now, I'm not saying that's suicidal signs, but certainly it could be indicative of problems of depression, anxiety, and it needs to be addressed. Because the problem is that if it's not addressed and it just continues to fester, that can lead to a point of suicidal ideation, because they feel trapped. They don't know what to do. So those are some of the signs that we have to look out of. I mean, when you talk about suicide itself, giving things away, constant remarks of guilt. I am a burden on my family. You shouldn't need me anymore. I know that I'm a burden for you. Those kind of remarks, those are problematic, and certainly need to be paid attention to.
I feel like there's a blur. I have a lot of friends who have teenagers, and they say things like, "Oh, that's just how they are these days," right? Or they're just being typical teenagers. How do we focus or unblur that line of how we think teenagers need to be today and signs of depression or suicide tendencies?
Well, I think that, again, someone who, like the typical teenager of today, is not the teenager that we know when we were growing up. I mean, we went outside and played ball. Teenagers today, or kids today, are texting each other across the room. So there's a very serious breakdown in communication and human interaction. It needs to be understood. Someone who's suffering from a mental health problem, texting won't do it. It won't help them. There's a reason why we have human interaction. There's a reason why we have flesh and blood. There's a reason why we have a heart. They need to feel that compassion. They need to be able to touch that person, to be touched by that person. That's very, very important. So the teenagers of today, we have to be aware when they become, or when they fall into social isolation. Look, there are kids who are also introverts by nature. That's okay, as long as they're engaging in activities that make them feel good about themselves. You see, the issue, what it comes down to in the end of the day with regards to a mental illness or a mental health problem, is what can I do for this person to make them feel good about themselves? We would call it, like, for example, self-security. A person who has hobbies or interests or places that they can prove themselves in, they're going to feel good about themselves. They're going to feel that I have something to offer this world. And someone who swirls, into a tornadoes out of control, into a depression, uh, they no longer feel like they have something to contribute to this world. What exactly can I give over? What am I offering the people around me? And so they need to be reminded of that. So long as your teen, for example, is still involved in things that make them feel good, that make them feel important, that allow them to grow, that encourage them to broaden their horizons, then you're in fairly good territory. But the moment that they're giving up on those things is the moment that they're saying, I'm not discovering anymore why I should live. What am I doing with my life? And that's where the alert has to come in.
I have a question, and it came to mind right now when you were saying that about parent involvement. You've said 2 or 3 times, responsible parents and parents who, want to take action. With today's technology, a lot of parents are there but not present, right? We're on our phones, Instagram, Facebook, checking emails all day long. How important is a presence, but like really being present? You talked about heart and soul and blood and flesh. How important is that presence in an adolescent's life when it comes to mental health?
Oh my God. I mean, no, look, I want to tell you something. God doesn't need my seal of approval. Okay. But he was brilliant when it came to the creation of the Sabbath. I mean, it was just, forget about, reflecting on God creating the world and were we created in God's image, put that all aside. The brilliance of saying, put everything down and just talk and just communicate and just, engage with each other is brilliant. We have that one day a week. And I'm not trying to do anything religiously coercive here. Far be it from that. I'm not like that at all. But it is a brilliant invention. It really is. And the point is, there's no question that if a teenager is suffering, by the way, even if they're not suffering, even if they failed in an exam or they lost the game or they broke up with a girlfriend, if the parent is texting or involved in work or looking at a computer while they're trying to tell them this, imagine what the kid feels like.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be my responsible other who really is supposed to be really interested in me. I am a part of them. They brought me into this world, and yet they don't have the decency or the time to look away and to look me in the eyes and show me that they care. I always tell people, when it comes to mental health, a child, a teen, anyone for that matter, an adult who's suffering from a mental challenge, the most important thing that they need is what's called validation. Validation is a statement that while I can't feel the pain that you have because it's unique to you, I understand that you're in pain, and I'm not leaving your side until I assist you with it. I'm here for you. If you're looking at a computer, if you're looking at a phone, if you're answering a phone call during the time that your kid is speaking to you, you're saying, I'm kind of here for you when it's convenient for me. But the moment that it becomes inconvenient, sayonara. And that's a serious problem.
Yeah, it's happening more and more. I always take my daughters to the park, and I do it. I have to be, open and honest. It happens to me as well. I'll come home from work, an email will come in, a work call will come in, and I'll be like, 1 second. And then I put my phone down and my daughters they go to watch TV, and I'm just like, what did I just do? So it happens to all of us. Rabbi, any last comments? I think that, first of all, if you want to reach out to Rabbi Hammer, go to rabbihammer.com. Your Instagram is amazing. Also, every week you talk about mental health and you connect it to like the Torah portion, if I'm not mistaken, and talk about a lot of things. So Rabbi Hammer on Instagram. And I would recommend that if you're part of a synagogue, if you're part of any school, any organization, bring Rabbi Hammer to come speak to the parents as well as the kids if need be. Because one, you mentioned, I don't know if it's about my speaking, you're very, very tactical when it comes to speaking, because some people would think that this is a very sensitive issue, and it is, but you make it engaging, you make it funny, you make it heartfelt. You allow us to feel and laugh and connect to you at the same time, as opposed to sitting there in sadness, like some people would think. So kudos to you on that. I've heard many people speak in my career, and you're amazing at that. So reach out to him. And I also bought your books. I have it here, Armed with Spirit, right? And all of your kids' book. You wrote how many kids' books?
I wrote 5 books. They're called the Gila Spreads Joy series. All stories based on Gila with questions at the end to teach children empathy. They're just gorgeous books. So they're 5 separate stories, part of a series based on Gila.
Yeah, we read them at night. My daughter picks them once in a while. We read those stories. And so I know this is a difficult topic for people to hear about and talk about, but you make it so digestible. There's no other word for me to say. You make it digestible, and you allow us to be open and transparent with what we're going through as well. When I hear you speak, when you're on this podcast, I think about, well, what am I going through as well? What can I do to share that and be transparent? Because it's not just the kids who have mental health issues. It's also us as adults going through a lot of those things. So thank you so much for being on the show. Rabbi Hammer, any last words for the men listening?
Thank you. The last words are the words with which I began, and that is, remember, our greatest attribute is life. We want to live. We want to embrace life, and everyone obviously deserves a shot at that. Everyone has to embrace and remember it, and certainly to take care to even those who are suffering, to somehow remind them of that and bring them there. And I hope and pray that we should be able to do that for all those people out there who are suffering.
Amen. I've got one more question for you that I just remembered I asked you at the day school. And I think some people are going to be wondering, and so I want to clarify this. When you speak about the Gila and what happened, you say she died of suicide and not committed suicide. And you gave me such a beautiful answer. I'd love for you to share that here as well.
Very, very important. We no longer use the term committed suicide. When you say committed, you're implying that someone committed or transgressed a crime. A person who dies from suicide does not or did not transgress a crime. They died from an illness. They died from a lack of response. They died because of the darkness and the despair and depression that they were feeling. That's not a crime. It's a tragedy. It's not a crime of that person. So we don't say anymore a person committed suicide as if they've done something terribly wrong. They've done something terribly tragic and painful, but we say that they died by suicide, just like someone who died from something else.
Thank you for sharing that. And as I always say here on the end of the show, may you be blessed with strength and courage to keep doing what you're doing, to spread the incredible message of mental health, of suicide, Gila's story. And thank you so much for taking time to be on here once again. And for those of you listening, don't forget to join us on the Facebook group, Tribesmen, Jewish Men Leading, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Tribesmen podcast. Rabbi Hammer, thank you so much.
Thank you, Yigal. Take care.